Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to session 815, Developing for the Managed Desktop. I also want to commend your stamina for being here at 9 o'clock in the morning. I think you'll find the contents worth arriving for. With that, I'd like to introduce Rob Neville.
Thanks. Again, good morning. My name's Rob Neville, and since those of you who are here, I think probably most of you, with the exception of a couple people that I actually know, wanted to be here. So, welcome. This morning we're going to talk about managing for developing and using a managed desktop. And I want to let you know that Mac OS X in the Jaguar time frame is a managed desktop. We're going to be talking about what Apple's doing and how that managed desktop works. We're going to tell you how your applications can play in the Mac OS X networked environment and how you can best fit in to this managed desktop. You're not going to get a choice, really. I mean, there will be, and there will continue to be, for Mac OS X, individual desktops, people using computers at home that aren't networked, but more and more as where your products are being utilized, and they're probably, as I look around this audience today too, I see a lot of people who aren't developers, people who are actually users of this product. And your customers are going to be in a networked environment. They're going to be using the management tools that we're going to be giving you, and or they're going to be managed by them. And you all are going to have to deal with the consequences of that management, either through an administration level, through a support level, or through a feature level. So what we'll learn today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about how we got here. We're going to talk about the managed desktop in Jaguar, and we're going to talk about how you can play in this environment. So how did we get here? Well, Mac OS X is inherently a multiple user system. However, in Mac OS 8, 9, and before, the classical Macintosh operating system was not a managed and or multiple user environment. We did provide, however, a suite of applications over time, ending with the Macintosh Manager applications, which allowed you to manage work groups, individual users, groups of resources for the network, and allowed you to give a multiple user interface to the Macintosh OS. Again, this comes built in to Jaguar. In Mac OS X today, it's a multiple user system. Now, individuals use it one at a time, even though some people can come in through Telnet or SSH or other mechanisms for accessing the data on the computer. Usually there's only one person at a keyboard with one monitor. But you can't guarantee in the long term that that's going to be the case. Because that's the way it is now, doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to be next year, the year after that. I'm not announcing any capabilities. I'm just saying that it's possible. So don't plan and don't program that you're only going to have one individual accessing the computer at a time. So Macintosh Manager 2.1 ships with the Mac OS X server today. It provides, as I was saying, the multiple user functionality to Mac OS 8 and 9. It also allows you to customize the desktop environment. It allows you to give access to users via work group or via individual user. It's largely used in our education market. It's used largely in our education market. Our education market is our primary customer. So we're going to continue to support this product, this 8 and 9 product, going forward with Macintosh Manager as it exists today. And this product was a follow-on to and an evolution of at ease, Macintosh Manager 1. We took feedback from the customers out there, we incorporated that, and we got to where we are today with Macintosh Manager 2.1. That's going to stay as it is. We're going to continue to support it. We're going to continue to fix critical bugs in it. We're going to continue to ship a version of the server that allows you to support your 8 and 9 customers and clients out there. But we're not going to be doing any new development on Macintosh Manager 2.1. And there is, in essence, no need for Macintosh Manager in Mac OS X. Mac OS X is a multiple-user, desktop-managed environment. And at Jaguar, we're going to be giving the administrators of the systems more control over what they can manage. So, in the process of shipping a multiple-user system to network customers like we have in schools, we've learned a few things. And I want to talk about some of the things that we've learned. Network traffic is not good. In the past, our primary customers, in this case the education market, were on slow-speed networks. Those of us who remember, remember the old days of coax cable and local talk, know that those networks, which were utilized in schools to a great degree, were pretty slow. Those things have been upgraded. Now they're talking about 10 megabit. If they're not talking about 10 megabit, maybe they've got a 100 megabit or even a gigabit backbone, but they may not have that wiring down to the switch to the classrooms. And that's traditionally, over the last 10 years, been the migration that they have moved through. However, we're actively marketing, and people are actively using wireless networks now. Airport is very big, and we are also selling lots of airport-capable CPUs. I'm looking around the audience today, and I see a lot of people with a lot of PowerBooks. There are a lot of people with a lot of iBooks. Those iBooks are all airport capable, and those of you who have airport cards are probably using them at this conference because we're providing you airport connectivity. The airport connectivity is not fast. I mean, it's faster than local talk, but it's not a huge pipe. And what you get here is, this could be, a sample classroom or 3 classrooms. And if you get everybody accessing data over the network simultaneously, if you all had PowerBooks, network I/O would cause a bottleneck. So network I/O, in essence, is bad. And that's one of the things that we've learned, is to try as much as possible to keep our network traffic to a minimum. Preference storage is another thing that we've gotten bitten by historically, one of the lessons we have learned. And to the point where, with Macintosh Manager 2.1, we gave our users the capability of creating home directories for their users on the server. And they used that functionality. And what happened was, we stored then in those home directories, we stored preference files. We stored cache files. We stored all the data that allowed a user to access a similar environment no matter where they went. However, again, with multiple users, not per machine, but per server, those people accessing that data simultaneously over the network could bring that network to its knees very rapidly, especially if you're storing a lot of data there. If you are using the cache file or the preferences file as just this big scratch area, well, that scratch area may be out on the network. And if it's on the network and it's accessed by everybody in the room all at the same time, even on a fast network, you're going to bring that network to its knees. The other thing that we've noticed is that with the notion of a home directory and with the notion of the files being stored on the server, the infrastructure and or the connectivity to that server is not always guaranteed, especially when you're talking about an airport environment. With an airport environment, that can go up and down, whether or not the teacher is warming up a cup of coffee in the room next door to the classroom, or some big person like me walks in front of the airport base station. you can get interruptions. And if you are not storing your files, at least some portion of your Scratch files locally, and the connectivity to the server goes away, and you try and then write that file out, but you no longer have a path to that file, some cases, some of you in the audience have written software which will crash. But in essence, what you need to be able to do is give the users the capability to save the file locally, wherever possible. Be volume independent. So just to reiterate, the customers are moving towards wireless. This is 11 megabit currently, 11 megabit maximum, and that is a shared environment, so that goes down. A lot of our customers, a lot of your customers don't have robust networks. Switches and servers are bottlenecks. Again, to reference the preferences and the caches again, let's say you have similar cache data for each of your users. And I now have 10,000 users on a server. Well, I've just replicated 10,000 10 megabyte files that contain the same amount of data, all existing on the same hard drive somewhere. Well, that's no sweat off of your nose as a developer. I mean, you want to have that data accessible to your users. But the end user, the person who is maintaining that server, might not like that very much, because suddenly their resource, the hard drive on that server, even though hard disk space is cheaper now than it has been ever before, still is a resource that they covet and they want to keep as clean as possible. So the next thing we're going to do, and we're going to talk about this, is from a development standpoint, what I want to make clear to you, and we'll show this to you here in a second, is that polling is bad. File I/O takes time. It takes very little time locally, but it can take a lot of time to a network, especially if it's happening all at the same time. So I'd like to come over here and show you a sample. And I'm not, this is on demo 2, thanks. Those of you, I might be showing software that some of you in this room have written. I don't know everybody here, and I'm not doing any of this to embarrass anybody. But I do want you to know that we're just as guilty of this, some of the stuff I'm going to be showing you. And what I've got, and what I'd like to recommend that you do as developers, and we're going to be providing you hopefully with a suite of tools that you can run as part of the development environment that will allow you to facilitate this. But this is something you can do today. What I have here in this particular window is I'm running top. And I've got 3 applications running, Address Book, AppleWorks, and Internet Explorer. And the only one that you can see, the other 2 I have hidden currently, is Address Book. So if I come over here to this other window, and I'm going to, the process ID of the address book is 513, and I'm going to watch the file system usage for the address book. Well, that's not a lot. Oh, it's still not anything. Well, that's boring. Okay, so let's try something else. Let's try AppleWorks. Now, AppleWorks is running in the background. And what it's running in, and I'll show you in a minute, is just running a blank word processor. Imagine 30 of those, all going through a 10 megabit switch, all at the same time. Now, going to a local hard drive, it's not any big deal. But going across the network, it is. And just so that I don't pick on AppleWorks, here's Internet Explorer. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out to you is Internet Explorer is sitting hidden in the background, and it's hitting its cache file. How often? Once a second. You don't need to do that. Please stop. those are some of the things that you don't have to set up a complicated server to check this kind of stuff out. These are some simple tests that you can run locally. The fact that we were accessing a cache on a regular basis, and that cache happened to be associated with my logged in user ID, well, that cache could be on the internet someplace. The home directory for that particular file could be you don't know where. We have a little utility which one of our engineers wrote that puts your home directory on an iDisk in Atlanta. You don't know who's going to be serving up the home directory. And we're going to be trying to make available to you as much as possible mechanisms by which you can, which the user can mitigate and move the storage to a local device. However, to do that, and if we provide that kind of functionality, you need to take advantage of system-level calls. So, and that's when we get into preference storage, which is the next point. Cache the user's preference locally, if possible. And if not possible, use the system-level resources. Store them in a system cache. Store your temporary data in /temp. Don't store it in your folder in the user's home directory. Use system resources. If we get continual feedback from customers about the amount of network traffic being generated, there may be some facility that we can do to take advantage of that. And if you don't take advantage of the system level calls, you're going to be left in the dust and your application isn't going to work well. Don't use preferences as cache files. Use preferences for those things which you want to have be static or across sessions. Cache files should be just that, cache, temporary, store the data on the local disk, use /temp wherever possible. Document access. Try and keep your document access to a minimum. Always assume that the reading and writing is going to take place over a network, and that extra network I/O is going to give your users a bad experience. Understand also that the network connection may not be persistent. I went out to a customer site about 3 or 4 months ago, and they had a router between buildings on a campus that went down at 1 o'clock every day. And they just lived with it. They didn't fix it. They just lived with it. They walked over at 1 o'clock every day and rebooted the router. Well, that meant that the servers on the other side of that router went away every day at 1 o'clock. So always allow saving locally wherever possible, and try and be volume fault tolerant. Okay, so that's enough beating you up. Let me tell you about what we're giving you in Mac OS 10 Jaguar. The administration for the server, the administration for the users, takes place on the Mac OS 10 server, and it takes place through the Server Manager application. And basically, what we're doing is we're managing resources in 3 different areas. The first area is users. And I think we all understand what the notion of users are. They're individual, identifiable units, people who actually utilize your software, utilize our software. And then there are groups. And the notion of groups is dependent in some cases on the operating system itself. However, there's also a notion of groups that is logical to how people utilize the software, how people group together. We have engineers. We have students. We have faculty. Those are logical groups. And those logical groups use resources in similar ways. Then we have physical devices, computer lists, groups of hardware resources by which the users and groups of users access the facilities that you give them access to, the applications, the printers, the hard drives, the FireWire devices, the CD-ROM drives. Those all get accessed through a computer. And that's where the crux of where we start managing begins, is in the computer list. We're also giving you the capability of setting, when you set up SharePoints on your file server, of setting up group volumes. Things that will automatically, when a user connects to a group, you will log in, and those particular group volumes will either be auto-mounted, they may be put in on the user's desktop, they may be put in a dock, so that the facility, in the same way in Mac OS X where you have a home now, we're not providing you a group now, a little group icon, but we're going to provide you all as administrators the capability of pre-configuring an environment for your groups of users, and SharePoints is one of the ways that we're going to be able to do that. We're also going to let you set up preferences, Mac OS X preferences, per account type. That means you can set up preferences per user. If you have 10,000 or 100,000 or 700,000 users, that might get a little ponderous. But we're going to give you the capability of doing that. We're going to give you the ability to set up preferences per group. Freshman class, sophomore class, class of 92, class of '07, faculty, whatever groups. You can also set up the preferences by individual computers or computer lists. You can also set them up by unknown computers or all other computers or computers not in any list. And you can set up these preferences in three ways. The first way is initial. What do I mean by initial? That means when the user starts up, you can put some item or set some initial preference for them. The user can then change that preference. And for example, I'll use the dock. When you start up Mac OS X, you first boot it up, you'll have a README item in the dock that you can delete. You'll have a set of default applications that get put in the dock, which you can remove. And initial preferences are exactly that. They're things that you set up for your particular set of users. Let's say you've got a new employee comes into your company, and you want to have a pointer to your website. So you might want to put an HTML pointer or a web page or a home page in the user's dock. And the user may leave that in their dock for as long as they wish, and you don't care. You just want to make sure that it's available to them the first time they log in. So those are the things that are initial preferences. Then we have forced preferences. And forced preferences are things which are written out every time the user logs in, or the user connects to a group, or the user uses a specific computer. So a user walks up to a particular computer that every time it gets booted, sets up the default printer to be the one that's directly connected to it. Now, if the user has permission to add more printers to that printer, to the printer list available to him or her, fine, they can do that. They may even be part of a group which allows them to print to any computer on the network. But when they log in at that particular computer creates a preference that says you can print to this locally connected printer. And no other computer on the network may have that capability. They may not have that preference set. And every time the user logs in, we rewrite out those preferences. So those are forced preferences. Then we have none. And that's a managed state in and of itself. By default, we don't manage any particular set of preferences. So by default, we have no management for the options. We let the users do whatever they want. But that's a conscious decision that you should probably make if you're administrating these facilities. So the other thing that we do, and this is where it gets really interesting, is we cache these preferences for access when the computer or the computer's offline from the network. So what's that mean? So I've got a PowerBook, and I log into my network. I log in as me. I connect it up to the server, and it downloads a bunch of forced preferences. And those forced preferences are a variety of different things, and we'll get into some of them, but some of them are which applications I can access, where my dock settings are, what things show up in my dock, whether or not I can read and write to the CD-ROM drive or burn CDs. And all those preferences get forced and cached locally. Then I close my PowerBook up, I unplug it from the network, and I walk away. Well, next time I open up that computer and log in again, those preferences are going to stay the same because I'm not accessing the server to be able to update or change those. If I'm the administrator of the machine, I'm given the option to clear that cache whenever I want. But if I'm not, I don't have that option. So I don't have to give you control of the computer I just handed you. I can set up the permissions and the privileges so that you can only use the applications that I want. You can only use the devices that I want. You may be able to change which groups you're accessing, so you might get different sets of applications for different groups as you access them, and different capabilities, different printer devices, that kinds of things. But you can't ever clear those preferences. So I also may not give you the ability to access, and we'll be going over these in a second, to access the system preferences themselves. So if I set your dock to be to the right and don't give you any access to either the dock menu items or the dock system preference, you can't change it. So we can give you, and we are giving you, the capability of managing down to the minutia level of how your users are going to access the computers. Or you can choose not to manage certain sections at all. It's your choice. All of this, as I said before, is set up using the Server Manager application. You set basic configurations here. You can create a user, give them a home directory. You got a managed environment. That user logs in. Every time they log in, they click on the home. They're going to go to a place on a file server. Or you're going to go to their home directory. It's managed. You allow them to pick a group. You may give them file system quotas on that server. You may give them print quotas on that server, and they're fully managed. This data is stored in the directory service node associated with the server. If the individual computer or the individual user does not wish to bind to your network, does not wish to point to a directory service someplace out on your network, they won't be managed. They'll be able to take advantage of your network in the same way that they could with the classic Macintosh OS. If they know a username and password to a server, they'll be able to go out and browse for it. They'll find it. They can log in with their username and password. They get basically the same functionality they get today with macOS 8 and 9 in a non-managed environment. If, however, they wish to take advantage of the power and the access of your system and automatically log into certain facilities or print to certain printers or see certain items, then they're going to need to bind to a directory service node. And that can be currently either an LDAP v3 or NetInfo. And there have been several sessions here at the conference on directory services. If you wish to continue to support 8 and 9 users, you will have to import those users into the Macintosh Manager application. This is only for the 8 and 9 users. The 8 and 9 model and what's available to the 8 and 9 users is different than 10. Server Manager is for creating your lists of users, giving them passwords, assigning them home directories, setting print quotas for them, setting file system quotas for them on the server, doing a wide variety of things. If you want to manage whether or not they see the simple finder, in Mac OS 9 or the panels environment in Mac OS 8, you need to use the Macintosh Manager application. And to do that, you have to import those users the same way you do today. I mentioned a little bit earlier, I mentioned about group volumes. Creating group volumes, creating groups, managing users by group is what we're going to be recommending to our user community. For those of you who are going to be administrating and utilizing this product, that's the way we recommend that you do it, as opposed to on an individual user-by-user basis. You may have in a large installation some big number of users. Let's say 50,000 users. You probably aren't going to have 50,000 groups. So to be able to define and update data against 50,000 records as opposed to 100 or even 1,000, more likely somewhere in between, groups, it's going to take you less time. And logically, there is some way to group bodies of units, user units, together. And if you think about it, you can come up with creative solutions for what you give individuals in particular groups access to. So, and you can set up these groups also get set up in the directory services node, as do the computer records, the computer lists. So what do we give you management right out of the box? We don't allow you to manage everything explicitly. We do, however, allow you to manage everything by not allowing access to some things after you set them up. So basically what we give you and what we'll show you is we give you the ability to manage the login window. What's in the login window? Well, it's how the users view the list of individuals. If I have a user list that's, again, and I'll use the example, 50,000. Well, I may not want or choose to show a list of users, all 50,000 of them, every time a user logs in, and to allow them to pick it. Even with type ahead, that may take a bit of time. So I might want, in that particular environment, to choose just to have a type-in field. I may choose, I have a small environment, I may choose to put, icons next to everybody's name because that's cool. But again, 5,000 pictures, icon pictures, may be a lot of network traffic. So you may choose not to do that. That's handled, and that's an example of something that's handled on a computer-by-computer basis. So that if I've got 30 computers in a lab, all of those computers are going to give a list view. Or most of them are going to give a list view. Or all of them are going to just give a type-in view. You can also launch particular items. Through the login window, you can say, automatically launch Classic. So login window. Finder. The things in the Finder, basically what we give you access to. How the Finder looks. Small icons, large icons. Now, in some sense, you may be thinking, well, why would I care about what size the icons are? Well, in most cases, you probably wouldn't. But on a particular computer, or for a particular group of users who may be visually impaired, or old like me, may need to have their icon bigger. So you may wish to change some of those options. Dock. The dock, where it is, how it operates, what's in it, what the user can do to it, all of that is manageable. Media access. Media access is, can the user access a CD? I'll go over the specifics of it. What sort of physical media can they connect to the device, to the computer? Internet, the internet preferences, system preference. Application access. This is where we get a considerable piece of our power. And this is where it may affect you if you're a developer. and that is we have if you are controlling application access, it's an additive list. It's not a deny list. It's an additive list. So if I put on, for example, mail, and mail uses a spell checking application to real-time check the spelling when I'm typing into mail, and I don't include the spell checking application, guess what won't work? Because it's an additive list. And once you say control what these groups or these specific users or people accessing from this particular computer can do, you might have a mail workstation there. That may be the only application at that particular workstation is just for email. And that's the only application anybody can use at that particular computer. So it's additive. So if you have suites, Internet Explorer is a good example. If you have launch this stuff it when you download an application or download something over the net that's stuffed. If you don't give the user the access, the file system will go, nope, you don't have power to do that. So be aware in your documentation that if you have inter-operating applications that you make note of those so that some poor schmo who doesn't use your application and is setting it up for, a school full of students doesn't then end up getting a call on Saturday saying, none of these students can access their blah, 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 because he forgot to add some helper app. The preferences are invoked at login, and we'll go over how they're invoked here in a second. And we cache these preferences for offline access. There's an order to the preference priority. And the order is that the first thing that gets loaded is the computer record. What's the preferences that are stored by computer lists. Then we find out who the user is. We get the user. The user is a user member of some groups. We allow them to pick a group. However, the preferences that are set for the user take priority over the preferences that are set for a group and preferences that are set for a computer. So that if I wish to have a computer preference take priority, I probably don't want to set that for a user, because anything I set for the user is going to override whatever preferences I set for either the group or the computer. So we recommend that you manage most of your settings per group and that you create, where possible, local accounts for your users. Since we'll be caching these preferences for offline access, having the users be managed on a local machines is very useful. So, what happens? User starts the machine up, and the computer is bound to a directory node out there in the network. We go out to that directory node, and we look to see whether the computer that is connecting to this node is in a list. If it is, we ask for its preferences. If it's not, we find out whether or not there's you're controlling any computer that's connected to this directory node. And we'll be showing you that in a minute. We get the preferences for that particular computer. Those things might affect things like the login window, which is why we go do that. It also means that now we're managed, and everything else is going to take place in a managed environment. So these login prefs go into the login window, and they're going to change the way the login window is displayed. Then we're going to get a list of users, or just to type in the username and password fields, depending upon how you configured it. If that user is a member of a group, we will display then a list of groups that the user can choose from. Now we know who the user is and what members of the group they're part of. We go back to the login window, and then we invoke the full suite of preferences for the computer, the group, and the user, and they're an aggregate. Some preferences are unionized. Printing is a good example of this. You may have a printing for a particular computer. You may have a list of printers that's available to a particular group, and a list of printers that's only available to an individual user. Those are unionized so that when the printer goes to print, they'll see a union of all the possible printers available to them. That doesn't make sense in every particular case, but that's the way it works. So I'd like to show you here on demo machine 3 and go through some of the preferences. Show you what we're going to be able to manage. What I'm doing here is I'm launching the Server Manager application. Enter in my username and password. And then what I do is I switch to the network visible node that the other computers on the network are going to be able to bind to. Now, I want to be able to make changes to that particular node, so I'm going to authenticate. And you're noticing that my authentication to log into the network node is different than the admin that I use to log into the application. I could have the server application be sitting here, and the directory node be sitting someplace else. It could be an LDAP directory. It could be anything. It could be anywhere, as long as it's accessible from here. That may be where I'm editing my records. Here we have three different types of accounts that we can manage. We have users, we have groups, we have lists of computers. And what I've got set here is two examples. One is I got set up as this notion called Lab 1. And I could go through and set up the individual. This user interface is not final. We may be getting questions. One question that we got was, can I set this up by IP address? There will be an area for you to enter in your IP address here, and that will be displayed. Excuse me. However, you can set up groups of computers. You know the addresses of the computers. I've got 50 of them, 30 of them. They're all known entities. I installed them. I set them up. Set up the computers per group, and you may have different permissions or different preferences. Not permissions, different preferences for the computers in Lab 1 versus Lab 2. You may set up the printer that the people in Lab 1 can print to is the printer that's in Lab 1. And you wouldn't want the printers in Lab 2 to be printed to, in some cases, by the printers in Lab 1. So you could set up individual groups of computers. You also set up all other computers. And you can restrict to which groups can access the preferences that are set by all other computers, and whether or not this is managed, how often the cache gets changed. You can refresh the cache if you wish. So in essence, what we've got is you can also determine, we come into here, I can say that the computers in Lab 1 list aren't managed. Or the faculty computers aren't managed. Or my boss's computer isn't managed. But all other computers are. All student computers are, for example. So this is where you enter in the computer lists. And if we come here, then I can go, and as we'll walk through these, I can set any of the preferences I can set for anybody or any group. I can set for any grouping of computers. We have groups. The groups are pretty much standard groups. One of the things that you'll notice is accessing these groups and controlling these groups are much easier and faster than in the product, the Mac OS X server product currently shipping. We've heard you. We've listened. We've made it easier. We've made multiple selections work, dragging work, and individual computers and individual users. So in each of those, I can click on the preferences, and for example, I can, now what I'm showing you here, if we go back to preferences, is I'm showing you here the applications. And I want to set up the applications that are used by this group of computers. So I'm going to say always right now, and I'm going to add a group of applications that this particular group, and this is Desktop Management Services Engineering Group. So what do I want them to have access to? Well, let's see. Text edit, because they're going to need to write source code. Utilities. Well, I probably want them to set up a console, because there may or may not be some bugs or some error messages. And where is that terminal? Oh, yeah, and then terminal. Terminal is a good one because, oh, I messed up. What do we want? We wanted a console. So they're going to get access to these three applications, and that's all. They're not going to be able to play their iTunes. I don't want them listening to music. They need to be typing in text edit and checking for error messages on the console and moving files around in the terminal. Then the system preferences, and I can go on and I can, again, manage the preferences. I can say, well, I want them to be able to launch Classic, and I want them to be able to access their desktop control and change their network settings. So that's going to be all the system preferences they're going to be able to access. All the other system preferences are going to be grayed out. I could show all of them, give them full access to all the system preferences. I can show none of them, in which case if they open up their system preferences, what they will see is all of the items grayed out. They won't be able to change anything in their system preferences. And they're only going to be able to use these three applications. Apply now. We're done with that. Finder. I can show them in the Finder. I can show them whether or not they want to use a simplified Finder or whether or not they want to use the regular Finder. Where they can show their hard disks get showed. These are basically standard Finder options. I can set them for them. I can set up a use of the commands that the Finders access. Do I want them to be able to connect to any server? Do I want them to be able to go to any folder? Do I want them to be able to restart or shut down? Or maybe all I want them to be able to do is log out. All of these things are controllable. And then if I don't give them access to change these particular settings, that's what they're going to get. What views do I want them? Do I want them to have large view or small view? We can get into minutia here, and the level of control we're being able to give you is exactly the level of control that you want to exercise, from nothing to, where the dock sits and how big the icons are. Classic. I can start Classic up when you log in. I can hide Classic if it's started up. I can warn where. I can choose which Classic volume I wish them to be running off of. I can allow them or not allow them to turn off extensions or to rebuild the desktop. I can hide the chooser. These are features that are currently in the Macintosh Manager 2.1 product. I can hide control panels. I can show other Apple menu items or not. I can put Classic to sleep. Dock. There are two things you can do with the dock. You can set all the preferences that you normally can from the dock settings. The other thing that you can do with the dock items is you can add things. As you can see here, I've added something. I've added the admin PDF guide to the dock for this particular group. That means, and it's forced, that means every time the user logs in, they're going to get an admin guide stuck in their dock. They can throw it away if I give them the ability to change the dock or not. User may add items to the dock if they wish or not. I can control that. But if they throw it away, if I give them access to throw it away, next time they log in, it's going to be there again. And the same thing I can do with applications. So let's say I want to put iChat in the dock because I want to be able to talk to my engineers. So I want to be able to chat with them. So iChat's going to show up in the dock as well as the admin guide every time. And we're going to go down here, and we have Finder we talked about, Internet preferences, what their default reader is, what their email address is. Now, these things don't make sense. The email address doesn't make sense for a group. So you probably wouldn't want to be setting these on a group basis. And we probably will prevent you from setting them on a group basis, though I believe that the interface allows you to do it now. What the web settings are, you can set what your default websites and the home pages are. For a particular group of users, it might be different. So you might want to have your HR department always come up at the HR website whenever they start their home page. Login window we talked a little bit about. Login window doesn't make any sense. This is one of the areas we don't have a bug for. It doesn't make any sense at a group level because it happens. You don't know who the group is when you log in because you haven't logged in yet. So what login items, what items get automatically launched, though, however, could be per group. So the login window only makes sense in a computer list environment. So if we switch over to computer lists and come in here to login, we show you what you can do with a login window. Name and password entry field, a list of users, show other user, disable, restart, and shut down, give hints, all of those things. And those things are per computer because it's the only place that makes sense. Media access, the things that we can do with media access, we can allow or require authentication to use a CD-ROM, DVD, or recordable disk. We can allow or require authorization or have read-only for internal disks or external disks, and those include zip drives, FireWire, USB drives, and then we also give you the ability to prevent them from removing any media if you wish. And lastly, we have printing. We can add printers to the list. We can create a list of printers to, I have no printers configured to this machine since it's local. Then there are no printers up here. I can create a list of printers. I can open up the Print Center. I can open up the Print Center, using Print Center, create some computer lists, and then add the ones that I want to this particular list for that particular group, and then that group's going to have access, or that user's going to have access. Or in this particular case, that computer's going to have access. So that's what we're giving you out of the box. Now, one of the things that I mentioned a little bit earlier is that these are all preferences, and they're all stored and defined in the CF preference model. And while we don't have it in today's release, if you all as developers read and write your preferences using CF preferences, hopefully, in the near future, we'll be able to give you an API that will hook into this interface, and your application can be here. That means that an administrator can access the preferences that your applications use. And they can do it as initial, they can do it as forced, they can do it as none. So the capability for your service or your application or your suite of applications, if you use the common system preferences, we will read them and write them for you in the same way we do for these preferences. And we're going to be adding more system preferences as time allows as well. So it's a really powerful tool to be able to give our users and the administrators of our users the capabilities of setting up an environment, including setting up, preferences for your individual applications. So development going forward. So as I mentioned before, what I want you to do is I want you to assume that your applications will be running in a network environment. If you're here and you're basically your users of the current product, and you're trying to find out how we're going to manage Mac OS X, hear me now. We're trying to tell the developers who are sitting around you that they're going to be working on a network, and that they want to make those kinds of assumptions. Assume that the application access will be controlled by administrators. Developers, assume that the person sitting next to you is actually an administrator, is going to want to actually control how their users use the equipment that they own. So identify any helper apps clearly. Example of this is IE and Stuffit. And those things are from two different companies. But you know and can know which applications get utilized, in the interplay with your applications as well. So mention those kinds of things in the documentation. Use a CF preferences model. I made an allusion to that before. This allows, in the future, for us to do managed applications. In essence, we're giving managed applications today. We're just managing the system applications, like the Finder or the dock. If you use CF preferences, in the future, we may be giving you APIs that will allow you to stick a preference model for your particular application in the same server manager app. And always take advantage of system-level compatibility. Always write out to standard system locations. Use /temp wherever possible. So in summary, I'd just like to say that the Mac OS X is a managed client. Out of the box, it's managed. The management may be none, but it's managed. Assume your applications are running on a network. Try and limit the I/O as much as possible. Don't poll. You saw a couple examples of polling. You saw an example of one application that didn't appear to be polling. So you cannot poll. I mean, it is possible. And use the CF preference model, because if you use the CF preference model, you're going to be giving the users in the long run the capability of tailoring your applications to meet their needs. So this is the last day of the conference, and most of these sessions have already been, most of them, 2/3 of the 3, have already run. But if you're going to be reviewing these, you didn't get a chance to go to these particular conferences or these particular sessions. These are the sessions which also refer to the data that was presented here. Mac OS X Server in depth, Mac OS X Server overview, both of which happened on Monday. And this afternoon at 5 o'clock, the server services feedback forum will be here, and we'll be able to talk even more of your questions. So with that, I'd like to bring up Tom Weir and Eric. Did I see you here? Eric is our marketing manager. I'd like to bring him up if I could, too. If you have any questions or concerns or comments, the questions, you can go to the mics. And mic is right there. You can contact either me or Tom Weir, and our addresses are there.